Tonight on Bridge City News, the owner of the two St. Bernards who were allegedly poisoned this week at a Lethbridge Southside home speaks out. The dangerous offender hearing for 35-year-old Trevor Pritchard is underway at Lethbridge Court. And the federal Conservatives blast the Liberals in Ottawa about the delay in repatriating Canadians from China.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. A family in Lethbridge was devastated recently. Their dogs were healthy one day and gone the next. Their vet says the dogs were poisoned. PCN's Loris Alexander was with the family today, who are warning neighbors to protect their pets at all times.
Hal, this was the table where Tika and Emma spent their last moments in life before the family had to say goodbye.
5-year-old Tika and 1-year-old Emma were two loving St. Bernards who loved the Campbells and the Mac Isaacs. Jenna Lee Campbell describes the moments she and her boyfriend realized their dogs were poisoned.
We tried getting Tika in the house. He was completely paralyzed. He couldn't move anything but his head, and he could barely do that. So we lifted him and brought him into the house and laid him, on the carpet, and we were trying to figure out what was going on. We quickly got dressed, got someone to come get our kids, and by that time, Tika actually had passed away before we could even get him to the vet. We rushed Emma to the vet, and we tried to save her, and she wasn't getting any better, so we had to make the decision to put her down.
Blood tests were done, and that's when vets discovered the pups were probably poisoned. Now the young family is left heartbroken by the loss of their best friends.
I still find myself looking out the back window to see if I can see them.
I know why my puppy passed away.
Now the family is looking for answers, and Campbell has a few words to share.
Hug your pets, because the next time you hug them, they may not be alive. You could go one day playing with them in the backyard with your kids, and the next taking them to the vet to be cremated and have them brought home in little boxes.
Anyone with information about Tika and Emma's untimely passing is urged to call Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
Police in Taber have arrested a suspect in connection with a weekend hit and run.
Yeah, on February 1st, about 6:15 in the evening, a westbound vehicle had struck a northbound pedestrian in a crosswalk, and the vehicle had fled the scene. But due to some eyewitness testimony, some excellent old-fashioned police work, and some evidence left at the scene, we were able to seize the vehicle today. And we have charged a male with the offense, but we can't release his name at this time. The information has been sworn before the courts.
The dangerous offender hearing is underway for 35-year-old Trevor Pritchard. The Coaldale man was found guilty in 2018 of sexual assault. Pritchard was also found guilty of sexually assaulting adolescent girls in 2004, 2009, and in 2010. He served a 44-month sentence in 2013 for sexually assaulting two 13-year-old girls. He was released, reoffended, and has been in custody since January of 2017. The Crown is trying to prove a couple of things. Number one, that Pritchard meets the criteria for a dangerous sex offender, and number two, that he's a threat to the public since he cannot stop himself. The hearing will continue until the end of the week, then pick up again on March 23rd. Calgary City Councillors have unanimously approved a call for a bylaw that would impose a fine against anyone advertising or offering conversion therapy services within the city. Conversion therapy aims to change someone's sexual orientation through counseling or religious teachings. The motion was sponsored by 5 city councillors along with Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi. A number of Canadian cities, including Edmonton, St. Albert, and Vancouver, have already banned conversion therapy. The city of Lethbridge has yet to ban the practice. Today is World Cancer Day. It's a day we take a moment to honor everyone affected by cancer. Many of us have seen firsthand the devastating impact the disease can have on our lives, but it does not have to define us. Loris Alexander spoke with a Lethbridge woman who not only beat the disease, but is now running a very successful business.
I was actually pregnant with my second child, and I went in for a prenatal exam, and he did a breast exam and found a lump, sent me in for tests, and discovered I had breast cancer.
That was 2 years ago. Mulder is now cancer-free and isn't just surviving, she's thriving. A stark contrast to what life was like when she first got the unwelcome news.
At first, we really didn't process it at all. It's really hard to, I guess, wrap your mind around that. But not good. Lots of tears. Yeah, lots of anger.
Mulder was 13 weeks pregnant when she had a miscarriage 2 days prior to her scheduled mastectomy.
I think it would have had a lot to do with the stress, but also my body probably wasn't strong enough to be able to carry a child.
But the light at the end of the tunnel brought Mulder to, let's just say, mountainous success.
I've always been kind of creative and I really like painting. And then I was scrolling through Pinterest and I found these mountain pictures that I thought were absolutely beautiful. And since I'm from the mountains and love wildlife and stuff, I decided I wanted to give it a go. So called my dad, asked him how hard they would be, and set me up with a few things and showed me how to do it, and off I went.
Mulder says her newfound business keeps her very busy. For more information, please visit mountainsidestudio.ca. For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
A review of healthcare delivery in Alberta says the province could save up to $2 billion a year if it follows 57 recommendations. The report by Ernst & Young says our per capita spending on healthcare is higher than most other provinces. Its recommendations to provide better value include allowing private clinics to perform more routine surgeries paid for by public health care. The report also says for the province to change work and pay rules for nurses and doctors, consider outsourcing food, laundry, and support services to the private sector. A teenager is recovering from non-life-threatening injuries after being shot by Edmonton police late last night. Police say an officer witnessed what appeared to be a male youth using a gun to rob another teenager. The area was contained when the suspect came out of a nearby townhome. There was a confrontation with police and he was shot. The Alberta Serious Incident Response Team has taken over the investigation. Oscar Arfman has been sentenced to life in prison without parole eligibility for 25 years for the first-degree murder of Abbotsford Police Constable John Davidson. Abbotsford Police Chief Mike Serra says the tragedy will remain with the department forever.
November 6th will always remain a very difficult time. I am so incredibly proud of the men and women of the Abbotsford Police Department on that day when we had the call of shots being fired in that parking lot, that our men and women raced to the scene. They were there to support John when he was shot and killed. The community was there to protect John and to try to save his life. And then also a short time later that when he was taken into custody through a very dynamic arrest, which was so incredibly brave by all the members involved.
I mean, he doesn't believe he killed anybody, and he thinks he's the victim, as he said, he thinks he's the victim of a car accident caused by the police.
The Conservatives blasted the Liberals, asking why there's such a hold-up in getting Canadians home from China. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, François-Philippe Champagne, says Canada's working as fast as it can to get Canadians out of a quarantine zone in China meant to contain a new coronavirus.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Canadians are watching this government with anticipation and disappointment as the flight that they were told that would bring Canadians home from China has yet to take off. The UK, the US, EU countries, Japan, and South Korea have all been successful in evacuating their citizens affected by the coronavirus from China. What is the holdup? Is the delay in evacuation due to the disastrous state of Canada-China relations? When will this government be able to set a date for the flight to get Canadian citizens from China home?
Minister of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Speaker, to answer the question of my colleague, the answer is not at all, Mr. Speaker. Once you have an emergency, the first thing you need to do is to assess the needs. This is what we did. The second thing we did, Mr. Speaker, was to charter a plane. This is what we did. And what we're working on, Mr. Speaker, now is with respect to authorization and organizing the ground logistics, Mr. Speaker. We will be there for Canadians and who want to be repatriated, and I will inform Canadians at every step of the way of what this government is doing for them.
Defence Minister Harjit Sajjan says once the flight arrives in Canada, passengers will be quarantined at Canadian Forces Base Trenton, Ontario, in a hotel-like setting for 2 weeks.
The military is ready to support the accommodations that's there. It's actually a really nice facility. It's a lodge where they have it's like a nice hotel room. But we're making all the preparations. Where Health Canada is a lead and want to make sure that all the precautions are there, and that's something that we can give good confidence that that's exactly what's going to happen.
Do you know about a flight leaving Thursday morning?
I'm not going to be talking about the timings of the flights, and that'll be passed on by Minister Champagne. Okay.
Or you just don't want to talk about it?
No, as you know, the information we pass on at the appropriate time. Okay.
The chartered plane to pick up Canadians is on hold in Vietnam, awaiting clearance from China to land. It should be coming back to Canada sometime on Thursday. When the SARS outbreak hit in 2003, many Chinese businesses across North America were hit hard, especially Chinese restaurants. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari says we are seeing racism rear its ugly head once again with the coronavirus.
Since when do we refuse service just because of somebody's, place of origin or their nationality, et cetera? This is something that people are extremely scared about. They are, this can spread so quickly that they're trying to, stay away from people. And as you said, it's causing them, a hit in their businesses. Not only that, it made a major hit in the Chinese stock market.
Catch the full interview with Lisa Daftari discussing the coronavirus and how a terrorist released from a UK prison stabbed 2 people on a busy London street. That's coming up in the second half of our show. Conservative leader Andrew Scheer accused the Liberals of creeping authoritarianism after Ottawa announced it is looking at overhauling Canadian media rules that would include licenses for news media. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the Liberals do value free and independent news.
George Orwell's 1984 was supposed to be a cautionary tale about the evils of big government, not an instruction manual for this Prime Minister. But it's no wonder that Canadians are suspicious about this. This is the same Prime Minister who has admiration for China's basic dictatorship. Yep. The same Prime Minister who heaped praise on Fidel Castro, a man who was responsible for the deaths of millions. And of course, he put Jerry Diaz on a panel to decide which news organizations will get cash.
Believe in a strong, free, and independent press. The third-party report we received proposes to exempt news media from licensing requirements. I want to be unequivocal. We will not impose licensing requirements on news organizations, nor will we regulate news content.
A woman is dead and 5 others were wounded after gunmen opened fire aboard a packed Greyhound bus. It was traveling from Los Angeles to San Francisco yesterday. The driver pulled over onto the shoulder and managed to force the killer off.
At 1:27 this morning, the California Highway Patrol received 911 cell phone call from people on board a Greyhound bus that originated in Los Angeles and was going to the Bay Area towards San Francisco. The 911 cell phone caller told dispatchers that there was a man with a gun on the bus and had shot the weapon and had injured several of the passengers. The driver of the bus pulled to the right shoulder immediately, northbound Interstate 5 north of Fort Tejon. At this time, we were working out the details exactly how that transpired, but ultimately they were able to get the suspect off of the bus without the weapon.
The Kansas City Chiefs returned to Missouri as fans celebrated their Super Bowl championship. Coach Andy Reid carried the Super Bowl trophy, leading the team off the airplane. The Chiefs won their first Super Bowl in 50 years, beating the San Francisco 49ers 31-20 on Sunday. 5 decades is a long time between championships. The flurries have ended, and it was good to see the sunshine again today. Warmer temperatures are on the way. Jeanette Rocher is here shortly with a complete look at the weather forecast. We had mild temperatures today and lots of sunshine, and nowhere near a record low temperature of -31 from 1989. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a look at the forecast. Jeanette, milder temperatures are on deck for the next couple of days.
Yeah, you bet, Hal, and including tomorrow, we're going to see a rise up to 3 degrees being the high. We are going to see temperatures reaching down to -7 overnight tonight, though. We've had a lot of sunshine. Could see some scattered clouds there tomorrow and lots of wind. We reached up to 80 kilometers per hour today. We should see wind gusts tomorrow as well. Looking ahead to the 5-day forecast, increasing cloudiness on Thursday with a high of 2 degrees into Friday, 0, and A Saturday should see some flurries. -3 is the high, and then up to 0 on Sunday, and climbing to 2 for Monday with a mix of sun and cloud there. So a little bit all over the place. Highs and lows for this time of year. 0 being the high, -12 the low. 17 was the high temperature on this day in 1992. And back in 89, it was a chilly -31. Glad we're not there now. The sun rose at 8 a.m. and it set at 5:30 on the dot, giving us 9.5 hours of daylight. Not too bad. Over to the west coast tomorrow should see some showers with a high of 7 degrees in both Victoria and Vancouver. Edmonton's high tomorrow 0. 4 degrees is expected in Calgary. Edmonton, by the way, should be seeing some flurries and a mix of scattered clouds across the rest of Alberta for tomorrow. And lots of sunshine expected in Saskatchewan and Manitoba tomorrow. Regina's high -5, same thing for Saskatoon. And -6 is expected in Winnipeg tomorrow, which is quite a bit higher than what they have seen lately. Toronto's high -2 with a mix of sun and cloud. Lots of sunshine expected in Ottawa with a high of -5. -6 is expected to be the high in Montreal tomorrow with scattered clouds. Looking further east into the Maritimes, Fredericton's high tomorrow -5. They should see some flurries. There should actually see a lot of snow. There'll be a lot of snow across the Atlantic provinces tomorrow. Halifax high 0. -5 is expected up in Charlottetown. And over in St. John's, they will see snow flurries as well with a high of 0 degrees. There you go. That is your forecast.
4 BC First Nations have lost their court challenge of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project. Their case was dismissed by the Federal Court of Appeal. They were challenging the federal government's second approval of the project. The project will triple the capacity of the existing Trans Mountain Pipeline to carry diluted bitumen from the oil sands to a shipping terminal on Metro Vancouver's coast. A lobby group for farmers in Saskatchewan is predicting the federal carbon tax will cut into their profit margins by 12% over the next couple of years. The Agricultural Producers Association of Saskatchewan did a costing review to gather the information. The study considered farm expenses not exempt from the carbon tax, grain drying, rail transportation, heating, electricity, and trucks hauling crops away. Association President Todd Lewis says farmers do not set their prices, so increased costs from the carbon tax come directly off their bottom line. Recent information from Statistics Canada says the popularity of cars is not what it used to be. Instead, 80% of Canadians now prefer to drive trucks, SUVs, and vans. In Alberta, that number is even higher at 89%.
Trucks nowadays are a lot more advanced than they used to be. Now you can haul the whole family in a truck. You can go grocery shopping. Now they have DVD players and all that. So it's a lot more family friendly of a vehicle now, trucks, SUVs alike. As well as in Alberta here, we know our winters in Alberta. We know how crazy it can get. A lot of people are wanting those all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive vehicles. So ourselves here, we've seen a spike in our pre-owned truck sales here at Lethbridge Hyundai, and you know, that's what we're putting it with, is the weather and all the fun things that you can get in trucks nowadays.
Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up almost 133 points on the day to 17,512. The Dow was up almost 408 points to 28,399. The S&P 500 was up almost 47 points to 3297. The Nasdaq was up almost 195 points to 9467. Oil was down 71 cents to $49.40 per barrel. Natural gas was up 6 cents to $1.88. Gold was up 3 cents to $15.2295 an ounce, and silver was down 3 cents to $17.56 an ounce. Wheat is at $228 per metric ton, barley's at $229, canola's at $4.49, and corn is at $269 per metric ton. Live cattle were down 5 cents to $122.73. Feeder cattle were up 85 cents to $138.08. Lean hogs were up 45 cents to $57.85. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly on the day to 75.31 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the dangerous offender hearing is underway for 35-year-old Trevor Pritchard. The Coaldale man was found guilty in 2018 of sexual assault. Pritchard was also found guilty of sexually assaulting adolescent girls in 2004, 2009, and in 2010. The hearing will continue until the end of the week and then pick up again on March 23rd. The terrorist group, the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard, has a new man at the helm. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari will have details next, and if he's planning on any attacks on North American soil. That interview is on deck. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Night to Shine is an event sponsored by the Tim Tebow Foundation and hosted by My Victory Lethbridge on Friday, February 7th. Night to Shine is an unforgettable prom night experience for people with special needs, ages 14 and older. This complimentary event begins on a red carpet with guests receiving the royal treatment. For details and to register, visit myvictory.ca. And if you'd like to volunteer, email carol@myvictory.ca. Celebrate Family Day at the Galt Museum and Archives for their second annual free pancake brunch. Taking place on February 17th, beginning at 10 a.m., come and enjoy delicious pancakes, music, crafts, and games. Admission is free. For more information, visit galtmuseum.com/events. Come for a fun evening filled with musical entertainment to the Lethbridge Community Brass Choir's Brass Day Concert, featuring international trumpet soloist and jazz artist Rex Richardson on Saturday, February 29th, beginning at 7 p.m. at College Drive Community Church. Tickets are $15 and free for children under 12. Purchase yours today at CASA or visit lcbs.yapcity.com. For details, go to lcbs.ca. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
A man recently released from prison after serving time for terrorism-related offenses strapped on a fake bomb and stabbed 2 people on a busy London street over the weekend before being shot to death by police. Joining me now to talk about it is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Lisa, police have identified the attacker as 20-year-old Sudesh Aman. He was convicted in the past of publishing graphic terrorist videos online. Weren't police not really keeping tabs on this guy?
Right. Well, they were, and that's why he was apprehended to begin with. That's why he was serving time. But, you know, we have to take a look at the rate of these terrorists going right back to terrorism the minute they get out of jail. You know, in the United States, we even have a pattern of these individuals being radicalized in jail or prison, and then coming out and wanting to launch these types of attacks, let alone, you know, those individuals who are going into these establishments with these convictions, with these feelings that are, you know, European or anti-American, in this case, anti-Canadian, in your case, anti-Jewish. This guy was actually serving time for dispersing material that was pro-jihadist and anti-Semitic in nature. And then as soon as he gets out, I think it was a week or so, he goes and launches this type of attack. Only 20 years old. You know, this will, again, raise a lot of eyebrows in the UK, because I know in the past when there were attacks of this nature, they committed themselves to taking a look at time served and those individuals, and they would be back on the streets. Would they be more keen to commit these acts once again? Well, the answer is, in this case, yes, and that this should become a priority for those, like you said, keeping tabs on these terrorists who do not change their ways when they're serving time. They're on the streets. If they're committed to this ideology, it does not go away. It does not get cured. And I think that's the sad part about this whole story, is that this guy was flagged, he was captured, and he was able to do it once again.
Unbelievable. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard, Quds Force, has a new commander at the helm, Lisa. He is 62-year-old Ismail Khani, the successor to General Qasem Soleimani, who was killed by a U.S. drone strike on January 3rd. Now, what do we know about the new leader? And is he planning attacks on various cities here in North America?
Well, he has already threatened the United States to be Qasem Soleimani's avenger, to carry out attacks all throughout the region on U.S. assets. And the U.S. retaliated with a similar threat to say, well, if there should be bloodshed, if there should be an attack or attacks similar to those that Qasem Soleimani was launching, well, then he will serve, or he will face the same fate that Qasem Soleimani did. And that was the special envoy to Iran from the United States, Brian Hook. He issued that statement in response to Ghani's threat to attack the United States once again. You know, the Iranian government, their MO over the last 40 years that they have been in power has been to flex their muscles and to threaten the world community about, exporting terrorists, and they have acted on that, right? You look at their support of Hezbollah in Lebanon and all throughout the Middle East, their support of the Houthi rebels in Yemen, their support of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria, in Iraq. All over, they support terrorist bombings and suicide bombers and terrorist groups. And they will do it once again. But when they issue these types of threats, we know that they have not changed any of their behavior. On the other hand, they are trying to get a nuclear deal or some sort of deal in order to normalize relations with the international community, particularly for trade, and to get the sanctions removed. And they are begging the EU, more specifically than others, to get into a deal to maintain their trade relationship, but they can't have it both ways. And the bottom line is that if they're not willing to change their ways, they will not have these relationships. They will not have the sanctions removed. They will not have the normalizing of relations. The good news for the world community is that this new leader, Ghani, who is the successor of Qasem Soleimani, is no Qasem Soleimani. There was no one like Qasem Soleimani. He was the shadowy commander. He was so difficult to pinpoint. He was smart and sharp, and he was brutal. He ordered the assassination of leaders and the attacks on groups and individuals and civilians. He was gruesome. He would not stop at anything to carry out his agenda. And I think this guy, he can try to be his successor, but I don't think he has that clout both at home and in the region.
An Al-Qaeda branch has claimed responsibility for the U.S. naval base shooting. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, this is very interesting because, when we have an attack like this on U.S. soil, the first thing that the media tries to figure out is, A, is it a terrorist attack? And if so, let's call it a lone wolf attack. This guy is operating on his own, a single guy. He could have been crazy. He could have been stressed out. It could have been workplace violence. It could have been any one of those reasons. And then when we realize that it is, in fact, terrorism, the bigger news here is that it's not only terrorism, but it was ordered by a bigger group like Al-Qaeda or like ISIS that we've seen in other cases. This guy was part of the military in Saudi Arabia. He was training here in the United States on a naval base. And to have this kind of attack happen again on U.S. soil, it wakes us up to the fact that not only are our enemies or these extremists operating on our assets abroad, they have embedded themselves or found ways to embed themselves here, in the West, whether it's in the United States or Canada or in Latin America. They have embedded themselves in assets that are close to home. And I think that that's what is the wake-up call here, is that they were able to infiltrate and radicalize an individual who was serving, in the Saudi military, to not only turn on the Saudis, but to turn on the U.S. As well. And I think people watching this will say, what do you mean turn on the Saudis? Saudis are the ones who support Al-Qaeda. Yes, they support Al-Qaeda to do their dirty work abroad, but not internally. And here we have a case in which this individual was operating not for Saudi Arabia, but for Al-Qaeda and against the United States. This is a pure act of terrorism, and it was ordered and directed from above.
Lisa, Israel has launched more strikes on Gaza after rockets were originally launched at Israel. Now, there's a report that Gaza terror groups are fearing retaliation from Israel after the rocket attacks, and Islamic Jihad leaders have actually gone into hiding.
Well, this is business as usual in that part of the world. You have, it's like Gaza is like the little bullies that come in and kind of throw the first punch and then go into hiding because they know that the stronger and the stronger opponent will retaliate after many times of not retaliating or retaliating on a lesser scale and not in a proportionate way. This will cause Israel to obviously step it up and to shut them down once and for all. You can't give your neighbor's land and then have them use that land to launch attacks against your civilians. It's just no sovereign nation would stand for that. And when they are launching these types of attacks from Gaza, yes, they're going into hiding because they know what kind of beast they're awakening within Israel. Israel has the military capability, they have the technological capability, they have the intelligence, and they will use all of that to retaliate to keep their citizens safe. And I think that's the bottom line, is that when Israel goes back to their daily lives, these individuals go back to planning the next attack, and that's a reality for the individuals living in Israel, and especially on those border towns that are very close to Gaza.
The death toll from the novel coronavirus is now around 400, with more than 17,000 people infected around the world, most in China. So far, there have been 4 confirmed cases here in Canada, and a 9th case of the virus has now been confirmed where you are in California.
Just in California, right. It's scary. It's scary because it's just a virus. It's just like catching the flu. It's obviously very highly contagious. And the symptoms, from what I am reading, are not so pronounced. So those individuals being affected have already passed and spread that virus before even knowing that they are contaminated with that virus. Here in California, you see many, many people walking throughout the streets and on public transportation with masks on. They're encouraged to do so because, again, from what we're reading, the virus is large in size, and the masks do prevent to a high degree of protection from the virus. That death toll keeps climbing, and it's extremely scary. This is higher than we've seen in the SARS virus in the past, because it has spread to places all over the world. I mean, I'm reading it's in the Philippines, it's in Russia. They're closing down, transportation, means of transportation between these places and China. And my sister is actually a medical resident, an internal medicine resident in Riverside, California, where a plane load of them arrived, and they're obviously being quarantined and checked and everything like that. But this is scary. It's scary because when you know that it's around you, and you know that how quickly these things can spread, you don't want to be the next patient who catches this. So people are encouraged to be very vigilant, particularly when traveling, particularly when they're around people from that part of the world who have recently arrived, and we should take all the precautions we can. And it's flu season. People are told to be vigilant regardless, but all the more so this year.
I remember 2003 when I moved my family from Alberta to Ontario and the Greater Toronto area, just in time for the blackout and SARS. I'm like, welcome to Southern Ontario, right? But one thing I did notice is that Chinatown in Toronto, because of SARS, was a ghost town. And a lot of people wouldn't give their business to a lot of the Chinese restaurants around. There was a lot of racism, discrimination. Are you seeing any of that at restaurants where you are?
Well, very interesting that you said this, because yesterday I went into the nail shop to get a manicure, and the woman who runs the shop is a woman who is from Vietnam, and she said to me, I feel very badly, but two Chinese women walked in here, and I told them that I'm busy, that I don't have time to see them. And she said, I am busy, but I particularly didn't want to see them because you never know, and I have 2 young kids at home, and I just didn't want to give them service. And it was interesting to hear that, because since when do we refuse service just because of somebody's, place of origin or their nationality, etc.? This is something that people are extremely scared about. They are, this can spread so quickly that they're trying to, stay away from people. And as you said, it's causing them, a hit in their businesses. Not only that, it made a major hit in the Chinese stock market. Their businesses are already being hit by the tariffs that are put on China from the U.S. But in addition to the tariffs, they were off for the New Year, for the holiday, and they were supposed to come back today. Monday was the first day they were going to be back from the holiday, and their market took a 9% hit. So these are major financial hits or penalties to be paid for this. And look, it's not a good time for the Chinese, let's just say that. But like you said, it's not just in China, it's here as well. There is this disease is being spread. I think people are taking all the precautions they can, and that turns people into, to judge based on people's nationality, and to not serve them, and not to give them business, and not go near their communities, unfortunately.
After years of Brexit turmoil, Britain has finally left the European Union. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the UK will prosper as a result. He has set out tough terms for EU talks.
Finally, that Brexit went through, right? How we've been talking about it for such a long time. And, you know, it was something that we almost, in this path to Brexit, we almost forgot what the initial reasons for Brexit were. You know, we came such a long way, and there was such a fear of walking away from the EU, that they would lose business, that they would lose their, you know, their trade partners with neighboring countries, for example, and the list goes on. But now that it has gone through, you have Boris Johnson, who is obviously a very large proponent of cutting ties with the EU, and he feels that very strongly that this will be something, a very positive step for the UK in terms of the economy and in terms of national security. Let's see. I mean, look, the proof is in the pudding, right? Let's see how the UK will prosper, if they will prosper, and how significantly they will prosper after turning their backs on the EU. What will the EU do in that case? You know, how will they step it up? How will they kind of fill this void in both, you know, in intelligence, in national security, in the economy, in trade partners, et cetera. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this lands. I think there will be a lot of questions and a lot of uncertainty at first that will result in us seeing that in a tangible way. But in the long run, I think Boris Johnson's onto something.
So how will this actually weaken the European Union, as many suggest, if at all?
Well, in terms of tying themselves back to the UK, in terms of trade, obviously, that's, I think, the number one. And then, you know, if countries have the choice, will they stay with the UK or will they stay with the EU? It's almost like a bitter divorce. Who will they stay with, right? And the UK carried most of that clout. Another thing to remember is that while the rest of the European Union has gone far, far left, UK had a swirl of that with some individuals trying to take it in the parliament, trying to take them further left, but they brought themselves back to center for many reasons, and I think one of them, again, being, well, the two reasons, main reasons, are the economy and national security, trying to stay on top of their intel, not letting the lax attitudes of immigration and intelligence gathering, and again, the economy of the far left individuals in Europe bring them down. I think that they want to bring themselves back to center. If you remember, we would have that conversation very often. This is an analysis on the the world as a whole, to say that, you know, Brexit was a precursor to the Donald Trump election, Donald Trump winning the presidency here in the United States. And when you look at that, that is a reset in world order. People saying we're sick and tired of the status quo and we want something different. And when you look at Brexit, that was the initial reason for the UK to say, we don't want to be tied to an acronym to bring us down. We don't want to be tied to a body that is meaningless, that does not do anything for us, it does not bring us up, it does not help us with more economic opportunity, that does not help us with intelligence, that has a lax attitude about letting migrants in and allowing those migrants to bomb them and kill them. Well, it's interesting because we had that story about London, right? So I think the UK needs to step up its abilities as well to crack down on these incidents as well. But I think, you know, overall, I think these were the main reasons that led to Brexit. It wasn't it wasn't, you know, in vain, and it wasn't just an idea that popped into someone's mind. I think the reasons were brewing, and I think now that they have their Brexit, they will have to prove to all the naysayers and the proponents about how this will work, how it will benefit the UK, how it will benefit their economy, and what they will do to thrive and to show that this was for the best for their both their economy and their security back at home.
Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Thanks again, Lisa.
My pleasure.
Two things in life, they say, are certain: death and taxes. Well, today we're going to focus on just one of these fun subjects, taxes. Our guest is Aaron Woodrick. He's the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. You can find them at taxpayer.com. Aaron, welcome to BCN. Can you, off the top, just share with our viewers a little bit about what your organization is all about?
Sure, Paul. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation is a nonprofit organization, and we're dedicated to three things: lower taxes, less waste, and accountable government. We don't take any money from government, and we rely entirely on voluntary donations to do our work.
What? You don't get any tax benefits coming your way from the government? Okay. Well, one of the issues you're continuing to pressure the government on is the federal carbon tax. Now, proponents argue that it is a necessary tax and that it will, in fact, improve the environment. So, what do you say to that?
Well, the challenge with a carbon tax is that, of course, to work at all, it has to be very high. It has to be very, very painful because the whole theory behind it is the higher the price, the less you can afford of something. So the obvious example is gas. A lot of people need gas just to go about their daily lives. And you can probably imagine what it would be like for a lot of families to see the price of gas double or triple. And that's the kind of carbon tax we're talking about if we really want to force people to change how they behave.
Right. Well, is it actually causing individuals to change their behavior? It doesn't seem like it. Maybe it is changing behavior amongst big corporation, heavy emitters, and so forth. Is it?
Well, look, by and large, for the people whose behavior it will change, it's people who can do it very easily. If you live in a big city and you can switch to a bus, a lot of folks live in rural areas. They don't really have any other option but to drive from A to B. And so what I think we have with the carbon tax in this country is kind of the worst of both worlds. It's high enough to annoy people. They see that gas is more expensive, but it's not so high that people, are going to stop driving or anything like that.
Right. So, I mean, it's obviously a political problem to raise it, 5 times the amount it is right now. That's not going to go over very well. So you're basically saying we're going to be stuck with this, looks like, an annoyance. But, or is it, you think at some point actually going to get that high that it will cause behavior, or no?
Well, I certainly hope it won't. I mean, it would be devastating for a lot of families to have a tax go that high. So I don't think it will go that high. Whether it actually sticks around is an open question. This has been challenged in court multiple times. The Alberta Court of Appeal is hearing it. It's going to go to the Supreme Court this year. So this tax may or may not be around in a year's time, and we would certainly like to see the end of it.
Okay. Well, there's also the argument that, hey, this isn't such a big tax because a lot of people, after all, are getting a carbon tax rebate. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, it's true that there's a rebate, and that's better than not getting one. But the government seems to be claiming that everyone's going to be better off. And it's basic math. You can't take a pool of money and turn around and give it back out in a way that everyone has more money. Somebody is paying the freight here, and it's unfortunately going to be people who are usually not in a position to do things like cut back on driving.
Okay. Well, there were some positive changes in the tax department. The federal basic personal amount, that is gone up, correct?
That's right. So the first, $12,000 you earn in income, you don't pay any tax on. That number is slowly increasing to $15,000 a year that you won't pay tax on over the next few years. So that is one positive step this government has taken, and we've applauded that. I think it's a recognition that they realize that a lot of Canadians are having trouble making ends meet, and the government should do something relatively simple, which is leave more money in their pockets so they can decide how they can best spend that money on their families.
Right. And for those in the higher income brackets, I understand they won't see the same increase in that basic personal amount, right?
That's right. It phases out around the $210,000 mark. So anybody earning over that will not see an additional benefit, but they will have the benefit, the current benefit still.
Right. So, okay. I think we can be okay with that for now. Looking at my paycheck, no, I'm not there yet. So, okay. This year's going to bring in an increase in the amount of CPP contributions, so toward the pension plan. Is it anything significant?
No, it's significant for some people, but it's not as much to offset the increase in the basic personal amount. It could be about $40 to $50 for an individual. So it's a slight increase. The real challenge is it's going up every year. This is the second year of a 5-year increase. So it does start to add up to substantial money after the 5 years are phased in.
Yeah, do you think that's going to continue going up that way, or?
Well, they made a one-time adjustment. So as far as the plan right now, the Trudeau government, they have a 5-year plan to increase it. This is the second year of the 5-year, but there's no plan beyond that.
Okay. And on the flip side of that, we are going to see a decrease in the amount we pay for employment insurance premiums, right?
That's right. It's not that much again, but about $20 a year in savings. So you can see with the various increases and decreases, really there's not a lot of big changes for most Canadians at the federal level this year. You'll be within $100 better or worse off than most years.
And with EI premiums, are they going Is that all going toward employment insurance? I know in the past there was an issue with some of that going into the general fund and being used, for other things. Is that still happening?
No, I mean, the government still has the capacity to do that, but given the controversy in the past, the government has been a lot more careful, and frankly, groups like ours are watching to make sure that they don't do that, which I think tamps down the temptation for them to do it.
Okay. And now let's talk a bit about the federal government's plan to continue the ongoing pattern of deficit spending. Is that necessary? Some say it is. Is it helpful?
Yeah, we really don't believe it is. And in fact, this government was running deficits at a time when the economy was growing. Most of the arguments in favor of deficit financing is when the economy is slow, you spend to boost the economy, and then you cut back a bit in the good times. It's a counter-cyclical spending, they call it. This government has not done that. They ran up the tab when the economy was doing relatively well in most parts of the country, and yet now they are now saying they're going to spend if there is a recession. So you can't spend in the good times and the bad times. The math doesn't add up. And that's frankly our number one concern right now is this government is piling up debt at a rate that is really going to saddle our children and grandchildren with a big bill to pay.
Yeah, I mean, you can't spend your way out of a recession, I don't think. I mean, not that we're in a recession, but like you say, do the math, right? And now it's certainly not a vote getter, but, should there be a plan in place to reduce spending, right? I mean, I look at my household budget, and if we're in the red, we have to make some cutbacks somewhere. Maybe we start buying used clothes instead of going to a brand new store to buy our clothes or whatever it might be. You got to pick and choose where can we cut back. And yes, it might hurt some, but it's necessary, right? So your thoughts on that?
Well, absolutely. This government has shown no ability to keep spending under control. And frankly, the worse it becomes now. For the people who don't like cuts in the future, you should balance your budget today. The more you spend now, the more painful it makes the longer you put it off. And this government, the most obvious example is spending on government employees. They have not kept a lid on the spending. Simply keeping a lid on that increase, you could actually start to eliminate the deficit fairly simply just by holding the line on spending. We're not even getting into cuts yet. That's not to say there are plenty of things this government is spending money on that they maybe should spend less on or not be involved in at all. But simply just holding the line would go a long way to eventually eliminating the deficit.
Of course, then you get the pushback from the various unions and so forth, right? So you got to deal with that, and of course they do tend to vote a certain way. Yeah. Well, I guess that's the pressure on the government, right? How do we handle this, right? I mean, you want to get reelected and so forth, but at the same time, they look at this going, okay, we got to cut somewhere. And again, when you see the studies that are done on, public benefits and so forth, the wages compared to those in the regular Joe sector, right? The rest of us working out here not for the government. There is, I think, about a 10% difference in the wages and the benefits and so forth.
Absolutely. So the people paying the freight, who are the people who don't work for government, government workers are making 10% more. They get very, very generous pensions. They have great job security. So I don't think it's reasonable for them to be demanding more when folks, especially in parts of the country like Alberta, are struggling just to keep jobs. So we would like to see the government take a tougher line with the government unions. The reality is, in any negotiation, it's supposed to be the union on one side and management on the other. But in government, you often have, it's almost as if the union has 1.5 people on their side, and that is why groups like ours, we try and be a counterweight there and make clear that there might be several 100,000 government employees in Ottawa, but there are 36 million Canadians across the country that need their interests looked after as well.
Oh, for sure. Are there any other specific areas you'd like to see the feds cut back on spending?
Yeah, we'd like to see them really get rid of what we call corporate welfare. We are for free enterprise, but we believe that businesses have to rise or fall on their own merits. And when you have government bailing out companies that should be going out of business, you're really setting a really bad example. And I've seen it in my few years here at the taxpayers. More and more businesses seem to think they can squeeze free money out of Ottawa, and I think that's a really bad business culture that you don't want to be encouraging.
Yeah, you don't want to see that many bailouts, right, from struggling companies. Why are they struggling? Maybe they need to change their business plan and so forth, like the rest of us would have to do, right? So any thoughts on like closing certain tax loopholes, that sort of thing? I know there's some companies that, they'll go to different countries, sort of thing, find some tax havens and so forth.
Yeah, look, that is a concern. Overall, the tax code is just simply too complicated. My basic advice to the government would be simpler is better. You know, we should all agree on what the amount of tax, what the revenue they want is, and get that money in the simplest way possible. When you have a very complicated tax code, you're inviting people to game the system, and guess what? It turns out to be the super wealthy that have the ability to do that. So if you want to keep the money in Canada, you want people to have predictability and avoid this kind of gaming the system. You want a simple, clean tax system that's easy for everyone to understand.
All right. Do we have any estimates of how long it might take to get back to balanced budgets, and also how long it would take to actually erase our national debt?
You know, I think an aggressive government could erase the federal deficit just in a few years. As I said, it doesn't even necessarily mean big cuts. It just means keeping a lid on. No more increases. That would go a long way. In terms of debt, that's a much bigger hill to climb. You know, the federal debt's $700 billion. We spend $25 billion a year on interest alone. And now a lot of people will say, well, that's all a lot of money to me. That's more money than we spend on the Canadian Armed Forces. So just on interest payments is more than we spend on the military. So it just goes to show you the price of borrowing that money. That's with low interest rates. Imagine if they go up. So, you know, we really think the government, step one, balance the budget. Step two, put forward a realistic plan, you know, over a longer time horizon to get that debt under control and eventually erased.
And practically speaking, how does continued debt affect our children and grandchildren? I mean, you know, their daily lives. What's that going to look like in 10 years and 30 years?
Yeah, realistically, it means higher taxes because they're going to need the money to pay for things, and it's going to mean a squeeze on the services that they expect. They're going to pay taxes, and instead of going to schools and hospitals and roads, it's going to be going to pay for interest on money that was borrowed 10 or 20 years ago. And I think that's just wrong. It's essentially a form of intergenerational theft, and that's the reason that we believe that governments need to live within their means today, so that we're not punishing our children and grandchildren.
Yeah, it's actually a good term to use there, intergenerational theft, yeah. Now, what about municipal taxes? An interesting animal there. It seems that in so many cities, these tax hikes we're seeing are actually outpacing the rate of inflation by a fair bit, actually. So, I mean, you do the math, logically speaking, how is that sustainable?
Yeah, it isn't. And I mean, this is another layer when we get into a debate about taxes. We have a saying, everybody knows it, that there's only one taxpayer. And from the taxpayer standpoint, it doesn't really matter if you're paying tax to the provincial government, federal government, municipal, sales tax. It's all money that you can't use for other things. And so we're concerned because it is a trend across the country. A lot of cities are starting to really jack up things like property taxes, and that is really starting to bite a lot of Canadians.
Yeah, something needs to change for sure. Your report also talks about something called bracket creep. It is kind of creepy. Can you explain this?
Yeah, so what bracket creep is most governments in the country, they index the income brackets to inflation. So, because the price of everything goes up every year, they increase the income tax brackets to match that so that you're not punished and pushed into a higher bracket just through inflation. But bracket creep is when they don't index to inflation. And unfortunately, there's several provinces, Alberta is one of them, which in fact, they just brought in the de-indexation. It used to be indexed to inflation and they've taken it away. So it's a sneaky way of squeezing people for a little bit more tax. And it's something we really discourage governments from doing.
Yeah, again, that just starts to creep up on you, right? And over time, it'll ding you. All right. Can you tell us just a little bit about the taxes we pay for gasoline? We touched on it earlier. Apparently 34% of what we pay for gas is tax. Is that accurate?
That's right, and that's before the carbon tax. And even worse than that is there's tax on tax. So most of the time, with the sales tax for places that most of the country pays the sales tax, you pay that on the price of the product you're buying. But with gasoline, they add in the excise taxes on the gas, and then you pay the tax on the combined amount. So you're actually paying tax on tax, which we think is completely inappropriate. It actually costs Canadians almost $2 billion a year. It is a significant amount of money. And it's just not transparent. The only protection most people have against a tax hike is that the public gets angry, so politicians won't do it. When they do it this way, and it's very sneaky, you're really just getting soaked and you don't have much recourse.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably enjoy watching politicians trying to defend that one. Pretty difficult to do, right? You also mentioned lower gas taxes would be great, and also making sure that the government spends that on roads, building roads and maintaining them, right? I mean, that's a big part of it too, for sure. Very briefly, briefly, any final thoughts, Aaron, on what you'd like to see our various governments do to keep taxes down, to reduce them, and if there's anything we as the public should be doing to keep our governments accountable in this?
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing I think is that we need to encourage governments to keep a lid on spending. We need to encourage them to push back when big government unions are asking for more without considering whether there's any money left to spend. And for all Canadians, I can tell you, working for an organization like the CTF, it matters. If you call your member of parliament, if you send emails, they notice, especially when you do it in big numbers. So that's the way to go.
All right. Thanks so much for your passion on this, Aaron. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Aaron Woodrick. He is the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. You can read their report online at taxpayer.com. On behalf of all of us at Bridge City News, thank you so much for watching today.